All right, so when you go to page 160, okay, so for new species formation, we talked about geographic isolation, okay. So first of all, when they go to different island, or if there's like a mountain ranges where the isolation of species occurs, so then your gene pool actually changes. Number 2 is polyploidy. So in this case, a type of mutation that results from errors during meiosis, non-disjunction. Okay, so instead of 2n, actually, in case of plant only, okay, it can be 4n or 8n. Okay, then it's gonna actually become a whole new different species. Okay, so the evolution in this case is like very dramatic. Okay, so at one point, okay, at one like fertilization, actually, the trait completely changes to 8n, okay, or 4n. All right, so it's like very abrupt. And then habitat isolation. So this is even though they live in the same area, so if there's like 2 different organisms living in the same area, but they don't really encounter each other. All right. So example is 2 species of one snake can be found in the same geographic area, but one lives in water and one is terrestrial. All right. So they don't really meet because where they live is different. Okay. Then it's gonna become like different species. Okay, and then behavioral isolation. So that is when 2 animals become isolated from each other because some change in behavior by one member or group. Okay, so when you read through this, male fireflies of various species signal to females of their kind by blinking lights on their tails in a particular pattern. Okay, and female respond only to those species flashing back to attract males. All right. So if that behavior is actually attractive to the female, then they're gonna mate. Okay, but if they don't have that kind of behavior, then they're not gonna reproduce with each other. Okay, in that case, so they recognize like different behavior with each other, so they are only going to reproduce, they're going to only mate with those ones that respond. Okay, so then they're going to actually create their own gene pool. You know what I mean? So that's how the behavioral isolation actually occurs. Also, there is a temporal isolation, so that refers to time. Different plants of one species living in the same area may become functionally separated into 2 populations via temporal isolation because some plants become sexually mature earlier and begin to flower in the cooler part of the season, while other plants flower in the later, warmer part of the growing season. Okay, then they're not going to actually mate each other. Okay, mate with each other, so they're going to actually separate into 2 different species where they themselves only interbreed. Okay, not with the other species, because the mating season is completely different. Okay. And the reproductive isolation, so this is talking about the anatomy, all right? So if your reproductive organ is completely different, then they can't really mate each other, okay? So for example, a small male dog and a large female dog cannot mate because of the enormous size differences between the 2 animals, all right? So if the reproductive organs are not like corresponding, okay, then you can't really mate with each other. So that's gonna be also the isolation, separation of 2 species, okay? All right, so that was the new species formation. All right, you should know which term actually refers to what kind of behavior, all right, what kind of phenomenon. On page 161, this is talking about the patterns of evolution, all right? So how the evolution actually occurs in different patterns. So number 1 is divergent evolution. That's on page 161 at the bottom. Okay, so if there's an ancestral species to start with, new species actually comes like in a different direction. Okay, so when the population becomes isolated from the rest of the species and becomes exposed to new selective pressures, okay, then they actually diverge into different species. If they are exposed to like different environment, then according to each environment, they actually diverge to different species. So in that case, homologous structures are evidence of divergent evolution. Okay, so when you compare like human with like other animals, okay, with like birds or other mammals, all right, then We are actually different species.